going to look at how Poland is going to respond to the possible U.S. election results. In the words of Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, the government has prepared for all contingencies in the U.S. election. But which candidate would assure a safer and more stable future for the Polish-American relations, considering the ongoing war east of Poland's border? Regardless of the results, how will Poland find its footing following the change in the Oval Office? Joining me now to discuss how these elections will affect Poland is Jasser, news director at TVP World. Adam, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Good morning.
So, according to the New York Times, to the latest information released, 95% chance that Trump wins this election. How important do you think it is for Poland to find its footing and to find itself in this new reality that we have after the U.S. presidential election?
Well, although, as you rightly point out, it's not yet final result, it's going Trump's way. Poland has had experience of the first Trump presidency, and the relations back then were pretty strong. So I presume the Polish authorities will try to build on that.
I wanted to take a look at the quote that I took from our TVP World website. Speaking on Talk FM radio, Sikorski was responding to allegations made by Mariusz Błaszczak, the deputy head of Law and Justice, that the government of Donald Tusk had only hedged on Kamala Harris' win, in which the response was, first of all, it's not true. We're not making the Law and Justice mistake of betting all our chips on Donald Trump. I was very careful to meet Trump's people. What does it mean? What could we expect from our foreign ministry to have spoken about to Trump's possible administration ahead of this election?
Well, Mr. Sikorski and Prime Minister Tusk and President Duda, they all made clear that they had all the corners covered before the election, because it was clear from the beginning that this is going to be a very close race. And Poland, given its dependence on US in terms of security, obviously could not risk taking sides. So at the moment, the ball is across the Atlantic. We'll see if Trump is confirmed as president, what his decisions are going to be. And of course, the focus is Ukraine. And for Poland, this is a high-stakes issue, Ukraine, right? Poland is heavily invested, both in terms of support, but also in terms of seeing Ukraine as part of NATO and the European Union. So for Poland, Trump's approach to Ukraine will be the signal of also how the Polish-American relationship will look like going forward.
And how do you think Donald Trump is actually, because you said that the ball is across the pond, across the Atlantic, how do you think Donald Trump is going to respond to the new Polish government? Because that's the change that happened over time as well.
Well, you know, Donald Trump will have to deal with lots of different governments of different hues in different countries. So I don't think this is at the center of his attention. I think the center of his attention is going to be a lot of domestic stuff, a lot of domestic issues. But when it comes to things that are of interest to Poland, namely Ukraine, we need to wait and see. I mean, we saw his statements. Some of them are rather ambiguous, some are worrying. You know, public opinion in Europe generally was, apart from with few exceptions, the public opinion in Europe was a little scared of Donald Trump and favored Kamala Harris. So Europe needs to wake up to this new reality, but a lot will depend on how Trump decides to play this game, and we all know that he can surprise.
The topic of Ukraine, the topic of the war, is incredibly important, as you mentioned, for Poland. How do you think that the Polish authorities are going to be able to try and convince Mr. Trump that he should actually keep his head in the game when it comes to providing aid to Ukraine?
Well, one thing we've learned about Donald Trump is that he is unpredictable. And, you know, he has had a lot of advice. We know that within the Republican Party, his party, there are strong pro-Ukraine voices, but we also know that there is a strong element in the Republican Party suggesting that the United States should stop supporting Ukraine. So we've had lots of declarations, some lofty statements, such as, you know, I will be able to manage to end this conflict,
the war
in 1 day or
1 day or 2
whatever.
days.
But, you know, everyone was taking these announcements with a pinch of salt. So now the question is, what is he going to do, really? And I think this will shape also the response from the Europeans. But the important thing here to notice is that Europe really needs to wake up to this new reality of United States gradually removing itself from European security. And that would have happened also under Kamala Harris, I think. It would have been more gradual, maybe more orderly, but America
It wouldn't be a shock therapy.
Yes. Now there may be a bit of a shock therapy, you're right.
Which takes me to my next point. Donald Tusk, Polish prime ministers have suggested that, as you mentioned, Europe should take more responsibility for its own defense. Do you believe that Poland is ready to increase its defense role within the region and possibly also within NATO structures, because who knows what the future holds in terms of
Poland has already done that. Poland is outspending most NATO members in Europe when it comes to defense spending. It's modernizing its armed forces. It's the other countries that need to now figure out what they want to do with this. We remember that Trump insisted in his first term that European partners in NATO spend more on defense. Until the war in Ukraine, there were only feeble attempts to do that. Now this is happening. So the question of what Trump wants for NATO and what he wants for this alliance and going forward looms large over this question. But Poland at least is getting its house in order. It's looking to cooperate with countries which are similar-minded, such as the Nordic countries. And of course, as often in Europe, the big question is Germany.
The big question indeed is Germany, but with less focus on Europe, how do you think Poland is actually planning to ensure that it is protected, considering that we're bordering with Belarus, considering that we're bordering with Ukraine, where Russians are, and now North Korean troops are also joining in the fight?
Yeah, well, the war is still taking place in Ukraine, not in Poland.
Not in Poland, let's make that very clear.
Yes.
But there is a looming danger like the ones you mentioned just a second ago.
Sure. I mean, Poland needs to do everything in its power to mobilize the Europeans to really get their act together on defense, on the protecting the eastern flank. Fortunately, there seems to be a number of countries thinking like Poland. Finland and Sweden joined NATO. They have strong capabilities. So, there's a lot of diplomatic work ahead for the Polish government, for many other European governments, and of course a lot depends on how Trump decides to play this.
So we focused on Ukraine, we focused on Poland, but President Trump said that some of the U.S. allies are worse than enemies. Who do you think he had in mind, and how do we keep Mr. Trump interested in actually actively participating in the NATO alliance?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think we have an answer right now. He probably meant Germany. Traditionally, he's been very critical of Germany on many different levels, but it's guessing. Again, we have to remember that with Mr. Trump, sometimes the rhetoric is not necessarily followed by actions. So we still have to wait until he formulates his policy. We will get some idea from the appointments he plans to make when it comes to foreign and security policy. So this will be the first indication in which direction he's going, because as I said before, there are members of the Republican establishment, and perhaps this is what Mr. Sikorski was referring to, that understand the concerns of Central and Eastern Europe, understand what is at stake in Ukraine. So these appointments will be crucial to indicate in which direction Mr. Trump is going.
Poland is obviously not a standalone country. We're also looking at the European Union, and Trump's victory, as some experts point out, could be a PR boost for Mr. Orban, for the likes of Mr. Orban, who we know is one leg over the fence when it comes to European matters and one leg when it comes to pro-Russian matters. How do you think this is going to translate in terms of its influence within Europe and possibly the pro-Russian parties in Europe as well?
Well, it's very hard to translate this into specific policy issues, but surely Mr. Orban will be in a good mood. He will be boasting about calling this election right. But at the end of the day, his ability to really influence how Donald Trump is going to handle Ukraine or anything else, I would call that rather limited. At the end of the day, Trump will, whether he likes it or not, he will have to deal with the French, with the Germans, with some of the bigger European powers. It doesn't mean it will be a friendly conversation. Some of these conversations may be troubled, but Hungary, when you take everything apart, Hungary is too small a nation to actually make a huge impact on that. So there will be a lot of, there will be a show, there will be a lot of statements, But in reality, Donald Trump will and his advisors will really decide on the future course of European policy.
Thank you so much. Adam Jasser, News Director at TVP World. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And now is the time to take a short break, but please stay tuned because we will be back with more news on the early results of the U.S. presidential election.